So,
shall we go ahead and get started?
Yeah, so good evening. I'm Usop Jong, the Dean of SLIM, and I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Sarah Sutton and Dr. Brandon Fay as our guest today. And this is the last but not least session for our the Meeting with Professors series. And it has been very successful. Many engaging discussions between the faculty and students. So the format is, we hear from professors first for their professional journeys, particularly in libraries. And then we open the floor to the students for questions. So academic libraries, some of you probably are very interested in. And then there are jobs out there, I mean, depending on where. So I believe Sarah and Brandon will give you some great advices tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dean Zhang. It's so nice to be here. My intention was to keep this very casual, and I suspect that Dr. Fay feels the same way. Dr. Fay, do you want to go first, or shall I go first, or how do you want to?
Yeah, why don't you go first, Sarah, and I'll follow up.
Okay. Professional journey I'll give away some secrets, I guess. In the late 90s, I was a travel agent, and a job that I absolutely loved, but that was becoming less and less fun as the internet sort of impinged on the work of travel agents. And so I started looking around for something else to do. And I looked back on my high school and college career counseling sessions, which weren't all that in-depth or exciting, but I do remember a college advisor asking me to describe my dream job. And I said, without much hesitation, I said, it would be a job where I would get to use computers to help people find the things that they needed to find. And hindsight being 2020, my advisor's response was not what I think it should have been, because I think it should have been, you need to be a librarian. And that was, I don't honestly remember what the advisor's response was, but it certainly was not that I needed to be a librarian. So there I was, late 90s, casting around for something to do. And I thought, well, I could be a teacher. I can be a high school teacher. I worked in an academic library at the time, and I thought I could do that. I could get my teaching certificate. So I started to go about to dive into that process, and it was like pulling teeth. It was constant hoops to jump through, and just wasn't having any fun getting into it. And one day I was looking at the American Library Association website. I have no idea why, but there it was. Texas Women's University was starting a cohort for a master's degree in library science, and it was a distance cohort, which was exactly what I personally needed because I wasn't geographically mobile at the time. And so I jumped right in with the help of Dr. Lynn Westbrook, who is still my hero, but she got me registered and ready to go to start my classes within about 2 weeks. And I know our academic advisors do that all the time, just as part of the work, but they are also superheroes, just like my superhero Lynn was. So I started library school, and at the same time, I applied for a new job in an academic library. So as I was going through library school, my 2 years in library school, I was actually worked in the as a library assistant in the acquisitions department. of an academic library. And I had not, prior to that, taking that position, I had never really given any thought to how library books got on the shelves, but I assure you that I found out. I was in charge of, anywhere from 5 to 8 undergraduate student workers, and we got the books ordered, we got them in, we got the invoices paid, we did all of that good acquisitions, wonderful acquisitions work, and that was it for me. The minute a professional position opened at that library, I applied for it, and I was lucky enough to be offered and accept the job. So my first job in library and was as a serials librarian. And hopefully everybody knows what a serial is in an academic library. Anything that is published in a series of parts. So that could be a journal, but it also could be a newspaper. It also could be there are a number of law publications that have parts that come in on a monthly basis and that are replaced. So some of the pieces of the law resource are taken out and the new information is put in. That also counts as a serial. So I was a serials librarian. And it was the best job ever. It was at a medium-sized academic library, which I really enjoyed because it allowed me to wear a lot of hats. So in addition to being responsible for serials, I was also spending time at the reference desk, and I was teaching library instruction courses, and I was participating in collection development. And in academic libraries, typically, each librarian is assigned to an academic discipline or 2 or 3 or 5 to do collection development in. And sometimes they are disciplines that you have some familiarity with, and sometimes they're not. So I was the library liaison is the term for that. And I was the liaison to the sociology department and the music department. I had a little bit of experience in sociology and I had 0 experience in music. But as the years passed, I learned a lot about music, and I even learned to catalog music resources, which was at the time and even now still kind of a feather in my cap, because cataloging music resources is not an easy thing to do. All the while this was going on, this was right about the time where libraries were really starting to dig into electronic databases. And so 3 or 4 years into my position, my title changed, and I was serials and electronic resources librarian. And I was the head of a department. And I had not only student workers to manage, but I had full-time library assistants to manage. And that was a kind of a shock. I swore up and down when I was in library school that I would not manage anybody ever. So I didn't need to take the management course because that was not going to be part of my career path. And guess what? If you want to advance in librarianship, especially in academic librarianship, you're going to have to accept that part of your role is going to be a manager. But electronic resources librarianship was very exciting at the time. It was brand new. It was a brand new position. Nobody really knew what electronic resources librarians did. So I kind of got to make it up as I went along. And several years after that, I went back to school with a dear friend of mine from the same library. We were going to earn our PhDs. And I knew at that point that I wanted to be a teacher. I'm not sure there's anybody left in SLIM who will remember my interviewing for my position in SLIM. But at the time I said that I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher. My dad was a chemistry professor. I grew up on a college campus. And one of the highlights of my childhood was taking summer dance classes on the university campus. And not only taking those classes, but being allowed to walk across campus all by myself from the dance studio to my dad's office. And I felt like such a big shot. I was probably 12 years old at the time, but I felt like a big shot. I felt like a college student. And I knew at that time that an academic institution was where I was meant to be. So I worked on my PhD, and my dissertation topic ended up being a research project to uncover the core competences for electronic resources librarians, because at the time there were none. If you look at the ALA website now, you'll see that there are a set of general competences for anybody who graduates from library school, and then they have a very long list of competences that are specific to particular types of library positions, so reference librarians and instruction librarians. And at the time, there was not a set for electronic resources librarians. So I set out to create those with my dissertation research, and you can now find them published on the NASIG website. NASIG is a professional organization that was originally devoted to serials and electronic resources librarians, and has now expanded its scope to some extent to include those things, but also the world of scholarly publishing. So yeah, that's the journey to my arrival in SLIM. And I think the only thing that I will add to that at this point, because I want to give Brendan some time to talk about his journey, is that I am now in my research involved in what is sort of half research and half personal learning project. I am learning to code in create code in both the R programming language and the Python programming language. And I am working on a project right now to apply that new understanding to analyzing job advertisements for academic librarians. So where most of the prior research on job ads for academic librarians has been conducted using qualitative methods, where the researchers review individual job ads and make subjective decisions about what categories the job qualifications that they find in those ads might fit into. No one in library science has applied big data analysis to that task, and so that's what I'm looking to do. And I have been looking at job ads for academic librarians for about 10 years. So I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that later on, if that's a direction that folks want to take. But I think I will stop there and let Dr. Fay tell us about his journey.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Well, I'll try to follow up that act. Won't be an easy task. I don't know if mine's as exciting, but I'll tell you anyway. So I kind of stumbled into the profession, to be quite honest. I went straight from when I was an undergraduate, I became very passionate about history. So I decided I want to go to graduate school to study modern European history. Applied to 3 different places, got in only one of them, and that was Indiana University. Which also happened to have a great library program. But when I started graduate school, I went into an MA program, in hindsight, a little bit recklessly and potentially financially ruinously, if I can say that, because I went without any graduate funding whatsoever. So I took out student loans for my whole first year of graduate school. And after being in graduate school and probably $40,000 in debt, after 1 year, I thought there's no way that I can sustain this long-term without getting some money. And so I looked around to see where I could get some funding opportunities in graduate school, if not from my own department, then from other departments. And in the course of doing my master's degree, of course, you have to take 20 hours or whatever it is in your major field area, and then 16 hours of graduate work in other departments, but it's up to you. And so I remember, having conversations with my grandfather, among other people, who was lecturing me about what poor choices I'd made, spending all this money on what might be a intellectually stimulating education, but which wouldn't lead to any clear job prospects, right? So he said, why don't you look in on some other departments, maybe take some classes in the business school, or take some classes in, I don't know, frankly, what he had in mind. If you can believe it, he majored in conducting as an undergraduate. So this was not somebody following his own advice, apparently. So anyway, I looked in the course catalog and wasn't too interested in taking business classes. But I came across something called the Library and Information Science Department, offering a class called Collection Management Development. It was the first class that I saw. And I remember thinking naively at the time, well, I have a library and I like collecting and managing it. So I wonder what that's like on a much larger scale in an academic collection that's, several volumes potentially, or several million volumes in scope. So I went over to the library school and they said, yes, in fact, as an Indiana University student, you can take any of our core classes without being a major. But while you're here, we should tell you, we offer a dual degree program with several units on campus, including history. So we can give you like a 9 credit hour discount that you would otherwise have to take if you took the degrees individually. Also we offer scholarships for students, not very many of them, because we're a professional program. So only about 10% of our students get scholarships, but you're welcome to apply. That deadline's on Monday, and this was a Friday going into their office. So I said, all right, well, I'll throw something together over the weekend, applied to that. And I think I was an alternate for one of those scholarships, and they gave it to someone else, and that person ended up taking maybe an opportunity elsewhere, decided not to go to graduate school. So I got lucky and got one of those scholarships. So I wish I could tell you, that I knew from day one that I wanted to be a librarian, and this was all planned out. But if I hadn't gotten that scholarship, mine was a purely mercenary decision financially to get some funding to get through graduate school, honestly. But after taking some additional classes in librarianship, I obviously discovered what an exciting profession it was. And in graduate school, I found that my training as a librarian really helped me as a historian, because of course you get an appreciation for how metadata is generated, how to do effective searching, how libraries are put together, all the different kind of services they offer that frankly a lot of my history colleagues weren't even aware of. Because if, from my advisor, for example, if you'd gone to graduate school in the 1980s, unless you really kept up with things, you might still navigate the library in ways that you did in the 1980s. And that would not be very wise, to put it mildly. This was 2006 or 7. Libraries change incredibly quickly, as you all well know. And conversely, my training as a historian actually made me a much better librarian, because you get to really understand the research process. You get deep subject knowledge of a particular discipline, in my case, history. You get to understand a little bit the life of a faculty member, how scholarly communication works, about the peer review process, and so on and so forth. So when it came time to graduate, I ended up finishing graduate school with a PhD in history and my MLS degree. And I ended up hitting 2 different job markets. I applied for jobs as a tenure track history professor. And then I pursued a bunch of opportunities as an academic librarian. And I discovered very quickly that the much lamented state of the job market in history was true, that jobs were very scarce and very competitive to get. This is still true, if not even worse today. And by comparison, the academic library job market was much, much better off. And I would argue it's even better now than it was when I finished graduate school, because I finished in 2013. We were well past the Great Recession, but still recovering a little bit, I think, as a society, and you saw that reflected in higher ed. And so when I hit the job market, I had 2 interviews for history, 1 offer for a 1-year position. I had made the decision to have 2 kids with my spouse at the time, and so decided I can't afford to take the the kind of risk on that is entailed with doing visiting professor gigs, where you essentially get hired on a contract 1 year. It might be renewed, it might not. It depends on a lot of kinds of things outside of your control. I wasn't interested in that for the situation I was in with my family. And when I went on the academic library market, I think I probably had 8 interviews, probably 4 campus offers to visit campus for job interviews, where you're effectively, you're one of 3 or 2 or 3 finalists. I ended up getting I interviewed at Stanford University for a Germanic Studies position. I ended up turning down that campus visit because to accept the job that I ultimately took at Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas, as an instruction librarian. And I tell you that because, and this is something that, like Sarah alluded to, I'm happy to talk about in more detail. There's just an incredible variety of jobs out there when you hit the job market. And a lot of it comes down to your training, the kinds of library work that you want to pursue, your own particular interests. And so obviously the kind of job that I was going to do at Stanford as a Germanic Studies librarian, where I would probably be one of 6 or 7 Germanic Studies librarians in the whole country. I mean, there's not very many of them, as you can imagine. Most libraries can't afford to have someone that specialized, paying them a salary of, $60,000, $70,000 to just do Germanic Studies librarianship all day. Most places you're going to have at least 3 or 4 disciplines that you're responsible for, and Germanic Studies would be one of those 4. Frankly, I turned down the campus visit offer because I didn't think I could raise a family the way I wanted to in Palo Alto. I don't know if that's true or not. I just heard horror stories about how expensive living was in California. And I knew that my wife wasn't working at the time. I'm not interested in commuting an hour and a half to work at Stanford to live in the kind of house that I wanted to live in. Or conversely, I also wasn't interested in living in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment with a family of 4 right there in Palo Alto, or whatever I could afford at the time. So again, I say that to you to underline the fact that sometimes when you get these, if you're fortunate enough to get different job opportunities, it's not just a question of prestige or how much you're going to get, even salary. Some of it comes down to fit with where you are in your personal life, where your spouse is, how mobile you are or not mobile you are, beyond these professional factors. And so I thought that Washburn was frankly just a better fit for where I was personally in my life at the time, despite the fact that it's obviously not nearly as prestigious as the Stanford job. So I worked for 2 years as an instruction librarian at Washburn University. Very different kind of institution than Stanford, as you can imagine. Washburn at the time, it still is considered open enrollment, meaning there effectively is no, it's effectively 100% admissions rate. So long as you have the minimum requirements, which is to say a GED or equivalent and a minimum 2.0 GPA or whatever it is, everyone gets admitted to the university. I feel like there's a big misunderstanding about this in Kansas. A lot of people think Washburn is elite or more elite than it is, maybe because it's kind of has a weird status in the Regent system. It's kind of it kind of feels private, even though it's really not. It's actually a municipal university. And so I worked for 2 years as an instruction librarian, teaching in their first year experience classes, basically working with a lot of incoming freshmen, acclimating them to college work and life. And among other things, that entailed teaching them information literacy classes. How to use the library effectively, how to take notes, how to do a citation, what plagiarism is, and so on and so forth. And I taught a lot in that content area. And started teaching on the side at Emporia State as an adjunct, and then a full-time position opened up at Emporia State. I'd always wanted to be a professor because I have a lot of deep research interests myself, much like Sarah. And that I couldn't really do in my role as a librarian at Washburn. That was not really doing a lot of research was not expected of me in my role. I had so much classroom time. There wasn't gonna be a way that I was gonna be able to work on my book project that of course was based on my dissertation in ways that I was gonna be able to, and frankly expected to, as a faculty member at ESU. So I joined ESU full-time in 2015. Sadly, this is going to actually, I've only got about 3 weeks left because I just accepted a position at University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg, where I'm going to be the associate director and associate professor in their library program. And so what else can I say? I mean, I might leave it there. I don't think I'll spare you anything having to do with my research for the moment, because I want to make sure we leave time for questions. So, yeah, I think that's it for me.
So as Brendan was speaking, I was thinking about all of the different directions that this conversation could take, starting with, what's it like to interview at an academic library, because that's very different than interviewing at other library types, and what are the expectations for research of an academic librarian, and on and on and on. So maybe we ought to see what direction some of our audience members would like us to take. What would you like to know about the inner workings of academic librarianship?
Well, before we go further, I'd like to kind of point out about the kind of very interesting things on Washington University related to the library science. Well, there are many rumors on Washington, Washington name, the name of the university, how they came up with that name. I mean, somebody kind of pledged the big money and never actually give anything, for that kind of thing. But anyway, the relevant one to library science is also the Brandon's point of kind of misperception of Washburn's kind of prestige. I believe it is from the fact that they have law school.
Yes.
Kansas has only 2 law schools, one in KU, the other one is Washburn. So that makes them a little bit higher than kind of open enrollment. But anyway, their law school actually started the database, the law database. And somebody told me it was even pre LexisNexis database. So that's their big contribution to the law librarianship, I believe. So again, it's kind of side note.
And they have a separate law library on campus in addition to the main academic library. Interestingly enough, I don't think I ever once met one of the law librarians there. I don't think that's a good thing. You would think that, just by virtue of being colleagues at the same institution, you'd meet once. But I mean, law librarianship is so specialized. I mean, you'll see a lot of job ads that ask people they even have a JD degree to complement their MLS, which seems like a lot to ask for positions that often pay very modest salaries. I mean, you all know full well, you're not becoming an academic librarian for the bucks, right? It can pay a comfortable salary, but not enough to warrant, a decade of education or a very expensive legal education. But such is the nature of the job market. You see institutions all the time asking for a subject master's degrees. Increasingly, they used to ask it as just a preference. Some places still do, but a lot of places will now list it as required. So MLS degree and an MA, subject masters in whatever, it doesn't matter, English, political science, art history, but they want to see both.
And then one more thing from Brandon's comments on the Stanford, right? So I had a kind of great example on that. Somebody from Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, got a master's degree from library science, and then went to UCLA, right? The big university as a subject librarian. And she was making 45, about 10 years ago. And her rent for 2 2-room small apartments was actually $3,000 almost. So she couldn't, and had 2 kids, she couldn't survive. So within a year, she actually went back to Illinois to join again with the husband who was working on his PhD. So that's the reality of that in California or a big city. Librarian positions, they assume they have housing already in that kind of city. It's like a New York City, NYC. There are, the PL, the public libraries there, they're making like a $56,000. Well, if you move into the New York City, you cannot survive there with that salary at all. So that's a very good point, Brandon. I think that Sarah Hertine has a question or a suggestion.
Yeah.
Hello, my question has to do with the different types of librarians. I understand the, not types, but rather levels. Like there's perhaps adjunct librarians or something like faculty librarians, and that there's differences amongst them. And also in terms of job security with those different levels. Can you talk about those, please?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sarah, do you have thoughts first? Or?
Well, I was going to ask you if at Washburn Librarians, academic librarians had faculty status, because that's sort of the crux of Sarah's question.
Yeah, we did not. We had faculty rank, but no tenure. Meaning we had the right to serve on committees. We were expected to serve on faculty senate. We were supposed to take part in shared governance in the life of the institution, but we didn't technically have all the protections of tenure. And believe it or not, this was, we did not have it because people were withholding it from us. In fact, when I got there, the library dean asked me if I could spearhead the efforts to try to get our librarians to get tenure, because he actually he was a little bit not unconventional guy himself. He was in the history department at Washburn. They ran a couple of searches for a library dean that failed for various reasons. And so he threw his own hat in the ring, I think the third time around, even though he was on the search committee, and he became the dean there. He's still there, Alan Behrman. But he came from the faculty side. And so he knew firsthand how important faculty was, or I'm sorry, how important tenure was. And he wanted to see the librarians at Washburn get tenure and the co-commit and job security and status and everything else that it comes with. However, a lot of my colleagues at Washburn were very hesitant to take on this prospect because they associated tenure with having to be super productive and a certain level of expectations in terms of research output that they didn't want. They would basically wanted to come in the library, turn on the lights, do their reference work, do the life of a librarian, and then when they turn the lights off at 5, they're done until they come back in the building. And whether, right or wrong, they thought that faculty members work on the weekends, they work at night. Some of this is true, of course, but they resisted the efforts to get them to get themselves tenure, Sarah, at Washburn at least. But it's hit or miss, I think, at a lot of institutions. Maybe Sarah can elaborate on this. I mean, you'll see it both ways. And it doesn't always conform to the prestige of the place. Some super prestigious places, the librarians don't have tenure. Stanford, I think they do. Vanderbilt, I think, maybe they don't. And then like less prestigious places, they will have tenure. I mean, ESU, I mean, we're not a super prestigious university, obviously, compared to Ivy Leagues or whatever, but faculty members have or librarians have tenure here. So it kind of depends on the evolution of the institution.
Just to clarify, you're saying that faculty, the position of faculty librarian, if it has that terminology to it, then that means it's a tenured position.
Not necessarily. I think, I don't know if Wusab or Sarah want to weigh in here. I would be looking for the title of assistant professor of libraries, or in the job ad, it should say tenure track, library position or whatever. That's the language you would want to look for.
So you better double check with your potential supervisor or the dean of the libraries. Is this for tenure line or not, tenure track? So I mean, again, as Brandon said, ESU libraries have still tenure, but a lot of places they have faculty status, they can join the committees or participate in the a lot of tasks with other faculty members, but they may not have tenure status at all. Well, tenure is very hot topic right now in many states. Normal traditional academic units may lose tenure system as well. So that we'll see. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
The institution I came from was sort of in the same position that Washburn, sounds like Washburn was in when Brendan arrived there. I was there for 10 years-ish. And during those 10 years, librarians did not have tenure. So they didn't have that perceived job security. And I say perceived particularly because I don't think that tenure conveys the same level of job security nowadays as it once did. And the library that I came from worked for 10 years to try and obtain tenured status for librarians and never achieved it. I think they have now since I've left, but even one of the things that has come out of the librarians, academic librarians seeking tenure is the levels that you point out, Sarah. So assistant librarian, associate librarian, full librarian, or something along those lines. And more often than not, in my experience, those are more likely to convey the level of experience that the library is seeking. So an assistant librarian would probably be an entry-level job, where associate librarian or full librarian would probably require more years of experience. But I agree entirely with Wusab that that's one of the when you're applying for a librarian, an academic librarian position, that's one of the very first questions you want to ask is this a tenure track position? Because if it is a tenure track position, then the expectations for your work as an academic librarian may be very different than they might be for a librarian who wasn't on a tenure track. And honestly, there are advantages and disadvantages to being on the tenure track or not being on the tenure track. And again, we can talk a little bit more about those advantages and disadvantages if you want to go down that route. Does that help a little bit, Sarah? So there's
a question from Kiana.
Yeah, in the chat, I was just looking at that. She says she was just curious about my learning of programming languages. Am I self-teaching or am I going through a continuing education program? There are some very nice boot camps like the ones that KU offers. There are quite a lot of opportunities available to learn R programming and Python programming and lots of different types of programming that are freely available. I happen to be hopefully at the end of a 2 years worth of work on a certificate in data analysis from K-State. But having said that, I have definitely supplemented my learning using some freely available resources online, and I'll put some of those in the links in the chat. But Coursera is one of them. Coursera is a site where you can find MOOCs, so freely available coursework from a lot of prestigious institutions. The World Wide Web Consortium has some very nice tutorials on a wide variety of programming languages. There is a group called Library Carpentries, or a web page, I guess, called Library Carpentries. That's also devoted to that, learning programming languages. So there are a lot of opportunities to learn programming, and I think personally that is a direction, a skill that is going to be sought by academic libraries in particular, mainly because faculty are taking that direction, and librarians who are supporting faculty research in everything from digital humanities to big data analysis. Faculty are going to need quite a lot of support there. There are, and just one, I'll give you just one example. In the digital humanities, if a faculty member decided they wanted to do some research, excuse me, by collecting a large amount of data from one of the library's licensed electronic resources, that faculty member could get the library in quite a bit of hot water very quickly if the contract between the library and the vendor of that electronic resource did not allow for downloads of large downloads of content from that electronic resource, something that a faculty member is likely not to know, but a librarian is. And so that's the kind of support that I'm talking about.
So for the big universities, the technical backgrounds is very, very helpful to get higher salary, obviously. And also I believe that comes with some kind of power. If you know how systems work, you can tweak the systems a little bit, with or without collaboration with vendors. That kind of technical skill big universities wants to have. So you can make easily $100,000 in big universities with systems librarians, IT stuff.
But I suppose I also should throw in there that that's absolutely not a requirement. Don't feel as if you have to go out and learn a programming language just because you want to be an academic librarian. That couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, our current opening, the William Allen White Library. Well, I'm happen to be the dean of the library as well. So, our current opening title is First Year Experience Librarian, to emphasize the relationship with the first year students, with the student success kind of center, all kinds of, the retention kind of efforts. So we intentionally put the title out. So it has nothing to do with technology. So it evolves, the titles, and I mean, that's Sarah's research topic, which areas, which words are used. So it's very interesting.
And isn't it an entry-level position?
Yeah, only kind of first or zero experience required.
Oh, yeah, so look for that too, unless you have experience. If when you're first looking, look for the words entry-level.
If I can just say something else that Sarah just said there about the systems librarian stuff, in terms of not being discouraged if you don't have certain skills. I mean, that's true for, I would argue, any library position you're applying for. Now, of course, you need to have certain basic things. Like if they say you need an MLS degree from an ALA accredited institution, of course have that, because you're not, it's a waste of everyone's time, and you will have that obviously because you're here. If it says that you need to be able to take up residency in a particular state or something, of course you need to be able to do that. But I mean, frankly, some of these job ads are delusional in the things that they ask for in a candidate. And if I tell people this, getting a job, a campus visit at Stanford, and people, wow, Stanford, man, you must be super impressive or something. Well, I mean, a little bit, but also understand that job ad, they wanted somebody with a PhD, with an MLS degree, fluency in German, reading knowledge of Dutch, Norwegian, and Swedish. They wanted 5 years preferred experience. They wanted, I mean, I can go down the list. I only had about half these things. I don't read Swedish or Norwegian or Dutch. I mean, I can read Dutch maybe a little bit. I can fake it with a dictionary or something. I didn't have any experience as a librarian coming out of graduate school. part of the reason I got a campus interview is probably because only about 5 people applied for the dang job, I think. I mean, but I got an interview, and of course, I mean, at the time I dealt with imposter syndrome. I thought, oh, I'm not going to be good enough to get anything. And, you know, here I'm interviewing at Stanford. They wanted knowledge of the European book trade. I didn't even know what that was. So anyway, just apply, because a lot of these places know that there is no such candidate that has everything they're listing in the job ad. They'll just ask for the moon, hoping that you can check off half the boxes. And many, many times they will hire, the person who gets the hire is, you know, they have the minimum requirements and not very much else. So don't be scared off by these ridiculous job ads sometimes that ask for all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, so currently KU, the University of Kansas, is recruiting Chinese librarian, preferably with Korean language because of K-pop, those things. Do you know how many applications they receive? 6.
How many?
Yeah.
6. So your chance is very high, you know, if you have related knowledge. It's, you know, so I mean, long-time Chinese librarian is retiring, so they need somebody to fill. But only, I mean, how many Chinese scholars out there? I don't understand. But with MLS, you know, that kind of narrow down. So you could be very lucky in a very specialized areas.
Mhm.
I think there are two folks with hands raised, and I think I saw Matt's hand first and Sarah's second.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. I actually work at Iowa State University Library. So I'm sort of already in the business, you might say. My wife also is, she's a department head there too. So it's a family business, I guess. But a question I have about the program in general, I'm more interested in sort of the back end side as far as the circulation, it's funny you mentioned serials, because that's my title is Serials Acquisitions. So
There's not a lot of us out there, so it's always nice to meet a fellow serialist.
Well, it's a little bit of a misnomer. Actually, I just pay for everything. Everything that goes through the collection, I pay for. So if you ever want to know about how much money Iowa State spends, I can't tell you. But so my question, and also like the electronic resources librarians, like my wife right now, actually, Iowa State has a few different librarian jobs out if anybody's interested. But she's hiring a circulation desk at a librarian level. It's not just circulation desk, obviously, it's a few other things too. But I was wondering, does the program go into things like that are sort of academic librarian or academic library specific, of more the running of the library versus the reference librarian side? So that's my question.
So I know I can say I'm getting ready to teach an electronic resources management course this summer that is going to focus on sort of on what I think you're asking about in terms of you know, managing e-resources. Sorry, I've got a tickle. I have not taught our academic libraries course, so I don't know how much it focuses on sort of the back end running of things. And I think that probably and I have not ever taught 805, the management course. So I don't know how deeply that digs into that as well. Probably not very deeply, because it's one of the core courses and it covers all of the all different types of libraries. I'm trying to think. Those are the three that come to mind as being closest to what you're looking for. But Kathy, please.
Well, Matt, I just looked to see what you're taking this summer, and it's database design, 844. So.
And also we have
That's a good one.
offered OER class, the open educational resources class in the past. So we can kind of offer that class again.
I know that.
I can tell you very quick, Matt. I have taught the academic libraries elective before, which is, I think it's a 2 credit hour class. And we have touched on management. I think at least the way that I teach the class, we dabble in one aspect of academic librarianship every week. So we talk about, organization, the organizational chart or the organization approaches in academic libraries 1 week. We spend a week on library instruction in the academic setting, collection management as it relates to specifically to academic libraries. So it includes some of what you're describing, but it goes beyond that to talking about more general trends and facets of academic libraries. We talk about shared governance and kind of just how universities work and how libraries fit into that culture. In addition to these technical kinds of questions that you're kind of alluding to, I think.
Does that help? Did we go a little ways toward answering your question, Matt?
Yeah, no, it really did.
Okay.
It's, the university library relationship is very interesting. So I've been my wife has been doing this for over a decade now, and she's moved up through the ranks for a few different university libraries. It's always interesting to see the dynamic in those situations. So thank you.
I think
okay.
Sarah,
Yes.
were you next, and then Frankie?
Yeah.
So I would like to just circle back to the job descriptions, and just specifically, there's a job that I'm very curious about, and I think would be a good fit, but I don't have my my degree yet. I'm wondering if that's something one could bargain for. If they came back and said, "Hey, we'd like to offer this to you," and then is that, oh, well, then I need at least an hour every day of uninterrupted time to work on my degree or something like that. But put some sort of stipulation into the contract that allows you to continue to get your graduate work done while on the job. And then,
yeah.
secondarily, curious about the pace of a university library. When it's like with ESU, we're going to go on to our little hiatus before summer semester begins. What do the librarians do during that time?
So let me see if I can jump in and respond to your first question. And the answer is absolutely. There's lots of negotiating to be done. In fact, when I took my position, as my first position as a serials librarian, it was 3 months before I was actually going to officially have my degree. And my position was contingent on continuing in my position was contingent on my finishing my degree. But I was just looking at a job ad today that's specifically said that they would be willing to consider candidates who had not completed their degree yet. So I think that's definitely still a thing. And I think that you could very well negotiate a certain amount of time, maybe in your first year, depending on how much time you had left in the degree, to be working on coursework. I absolutely think that's something. And my sense, and I don't have any hard numbers to throw at you to support this, but my sense is that academic libraries are really trying to look hard for the right people, and would be willing to make those kinds of concessions. And Sarah, tell me
The pacing question, right?
the pacing question. Oh, sorry, I have to laugh a little bit at that, because my first couple of years in my academic librarian position, I thought, oh, summer, thank goodness, I'll be able to catch up and things will slow down a little bit. And then the emails started to come in. since it's summer and things are slow, I think we should try to accomplish this. And I think we should try to accomplish that. And don't you think you could lead a group who might be able to answer this question before summer starts? And the bottom line is just like public libraries and school libraries and any other kind of library, there are always more projects to be completed than there is time and people to complete them.
Related to that, kind of double check again whether the position is 9 months or 12 months. Still, some university or even the community colleges in West Coast, they actually have 9 months contract for librarians as a faculty status. So it's kind of confusing.
But not necessarily a bad thing. If you think about it, I mean, if you can, if the salary is enough for you to live on, there's not a lot to argue with having the summers off. So there's my 2 cents.
The only other thing I would add to that, Sarah, is frankly, the in terms of the pace question, it's not that unlike being a student in the sense that obviously students experience peaks and valleys during the semester, right? With when projects are coming in and whatever. And a lot of that is mirrored in the life of the librarians because, you know, there's a big surge of activity in the week before spring break when a lot of midterms are happening and stuff. And there's a lot of people packing the library, waiting till the last minute to do research projects. Same is true during finals week. So you'll be correspondingly busier those times, and then there'll be slower times. And then the only other thing I'll say is, you know, to my understanding, a lot of, you know, COVID has resulted in a lot of these hybrid work arrangements with people working, you know, from home half the week, or at least 1 or 2 days a week. Some of those might continue because, you know, I think it's worth asking the question, at least, do we really need librarians in the building 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, you know, 345 days a year or whatever it is? Does it really make sense in the middle of July to have people coming in, punching the clock when there's barely any students there for summer school? And, you know, okay, if we're paying them a salary, there are other things we can have them do. Can they work on the research projects? Can we help maybe get them working with faculty on digital humanities initiatives like Sarah was mentioning, rather than maybe sitting at the reference desk for 3 hours a day, having a couple people ask them where the bathroom is, right? So I think there's a lot of people thinking about that question. So it varies greatly, the pacing.
There's in the sort of job ads research circles nowadays, there is sort of this sort of side discussion about remote work and how do you identify a job ad that might allow you remote work.
So we have a little time left. So Frankie.
I promise my question will be kind of quick. So I'm more interested in the instruction side of being an academic librarian, and I currently work for KU in the libraries, and they don't really have like a instruction program, but I've heard that's kind of weird. Would you say that like in an academic library, you would do more instruction as a faculty librarian, or like, is it more focused on helping like faculty research? Because at KU, it's very much focused on faculty research over like student instruction.
That is really interesting. I don't know, Brendan, I don't know about you, but in my experience, that is kind of weird. The institution that I worked at was very, very much focused on instruction, especially instruction for undergraduates. We even to the point where in our collection policies, we would always favor collecting items that would support the curriculum and student learning over faculty research. In fact, in probably more of the years that I was there than not, we didn't have a budget for collecting resources for faculty. So in that respect, I would say that is a little strange. I would be more, I think it would be more usual to have more of a focus on instruction.
I mean, I would say yes and no in terms of the weirdness. I mean, yes, for the obvious reasons, there should be an emphasis on this, of course. no, but because it seems to me a lot of universities have had at least until recently, a pretty cavalier attitude about instruction. I remember when I was at Indiana, I knew I wanted to be an academic librarian, and I also knew I wanted to be an instructor or to have a heavy teaching component. So I remember going to my advisor's office one day. I'd finished all my core classes, and I said, "Okay, I'm ready to take your instruction course, whatever that is. I don't know what the course number is. Can you just tell it to me real quick?" And she turned around and said, "What instruction course?" And I was like, "Well, surely there's like a certain pedagogy class that people take. I mean, there's a whole category of jobs called instruction librarian." She's like, "No, we don't have that." So, I mean, so fortunately, the history department they had a class called Teaching College History. And of course, the content's different, but good practices in teaching are this, they translate well across disciplines. How to manage the classroom effectively, how to create, come up with creative assignments, how to do assessment, and so on and so forth. But I think for the longest time, places have thought of good teachers as kind of like, you either have it or you don't. Good teaching is kind of a knack. You can't really learn how to be a good teacher. Maybe kind of like you hear this kind of thinking when it comes to writing sometimes. Like good writing, you either have it or you don't. You can't really learn how to become a great writer. I have mixed feelings about this, thinking myself. But I will say, and this is the last comment I'll say here. I think these days are gone by now for like you or for current professionals, because if there was ever a time when institutions could have this cavalier attitude about teaching, they're long gone now. I mean, just look at the enrollment crisis in higher ed all over the state, or frankly, all over the country. I mean, you talk to administrators in higher ed, and you always hear this year 2025, when there's a demographic cliff that we're going to reach and immediately fall off. When there's like high school graduation rates go down, there's a lot of colleges and universities in the country competing for a limited number of students. And so there's if you're going to get students to come to your institution, you better retain them and get them to graduate on time, or you're going to hear about it from the Board of Regents and from state legislatures. And if you want to get them to graduate, if you want to get them to stay there and graduate on time, among other things, you have to instill in them how to use the library, how to do research effectively. You can't just throw them in the deep end and say, well, a bunch of them will fail out, so who that's kind of their problem. College is hard, it's not meant for everybody, so they can just figure out their life after that. I mean, I think that kind of thinking maybe unfortunately was in place maybe in the 60s or 70s or 80s. Not anymore. There's an all hands on deck approach, I think, at least there should be most places. And that means thinking hard about what it means to be a good instructor in a classroom as much as in a library setting.
My experience pretty much echoes Brendan's, and the only thing I would add is that it's not just the institution and the Board of Regents, but it's also the institutional accrediting agency. There are accreditors who accredit an entire institution, and it was at the university where I was. It really wasn't until we were coming up for institutional accreditation that the need for strategic library instruction was addressed. And at that point, going into that accreditation visit, the library was very much center stage in terms of how they were going to collaborate with the first year programs to conduct that library instruction. So I definitely saw that shift that Brendan is talking about.
Okay, I wish we could go further, but it's already 8:04. So I'd like to wrap up this session here. Thank you so much, Dr. Sutton and Dr. Fay, and thank you everybody for your participation. We will continue this series next fall. So if you are not graduating soon, you will have another series. Thank you and have a good evening. Brandon?
Yeah, sorry, just real quick. I just want to tell everybody, I know we had limited time today, and I see a lot of familiar faces from students I've had, others of you I've never met before. please always know that you can reach out to me anytime. I can't promise that I can always help. And I'm leaving ESU, but find my email address at Southern Miss. You guys are good librarians. I always am happy to help people in any way that I can. If you want to run a cover letter by me, if you want to talk about how to look for jobs effectively. I love talking about academic libraries. I see them as so important to university life and being, creating successful students. And I oftentimes, as you all know, I have to apologize in the core classes all the time because I go on tangents about academic libraries, and the public librarians and school librarians get mad at me because they say, well, hold on, man, what you're talking to us too? We're in your class, but I don't have to do that with this group. So just reach out anytime you have a question. I'm happy to talk anytime about anything I can or help in any way that I can.
As am I, always happy to talk about academic librarianship. Anything I can do to help.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for everybody.
Have good night.